How's it going? Okay, in case you missed Jose's announcement, today is the sex sermon. So two things. Number one, if you don't want your children here, this is your last chance. We always have the military prayer at the end of the service, and the person who did the military prayer came up and was like, I did not know I was praying after that message. And so I will use embarrassing words, and I will use them occasionally, and so but actually, it's actually a really good thing if you have a kid who's in the 10, 11, 12 age range, because what we're going to be doing is we're talking to you about the concept of sex and intimacy, but we're also laying a foundation for you to have conversations with your children so that you've got some terminology, some ways to talk about it. So it's very valuable as they get a certain age, no matter how embarrassing it is to sit with your parents during this time. And by the way, if you look around, you will not see any of my daughters. I have been doing this message for 10 years. None of them have made it into the service. So, which makes sense. I mean, who wants to watch their dad talk about sex? That takes the icky factor to about a 27, I believe. Before I get going, in case anybody wanted to run out, just a quick sort of an announcement thing. In case you haven't noticed, our church is odd. And one of the things that's odd about our church is because we're so heavily military, we love people that are not military. We got lots of non-military. We have a ton of military as well. We lose between 25 and 33% of our church every year. Uncle Sam just says it's time for you to go somewhere else. So one of the things that means is if you decide this is your church, this is where you want to be as a Christian in this body. A lot of churches, you can show up and just hang out for about a year or two before you get busy, and they're okay. We're not okay with that. We're not. We can't be. So what we need you to do is, I'm talking to the new people here. If you're ready, this is your church. You're planning to spend however long you're going to be in this area here. It's time to get it's time to get moving. And so after the service, we've got two tables, one on each side, for the two biggest ministries on Sunday morning that need the most people to help out and lose the most people every year. And that's our Next Generation Children's Ministry and our First Impressions, the people that greet you in. So I would encourage you to go to one of those tables after the service and talk to them about how you can be involved, how you can participate. So anyway, that was free. Now, this can get so quiet during this message. It's so cool to just listen to the quiet. Oh, by the way, there's one other announcement. I forgot to announce. If you're one of those people who stays home and watches this sermon online, okay, there is a cover charge. Okay, we expect extra donations today from you for hiding in your house or whatever room you're hiding in. For that, just pointing that out, just so you know, we're on to you. Okay, now, for years our culture has been saying to us that sex is a purely physical act that is about pleasure, and that you can do it however, whenever, with whomever that you want. As long as you are getting enjoyment mutually, it is okay. There are no ramifications. That because it's a purely physical activity, there's no spiritual issues, no emotional issues. It is all fine. Have you looked at the news recently? Have you checked the internet? Have you seen any news? Is there anything going on in the world right now besides sexual harassment claims? That is the only thing happening, is we are watching some of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry, in the political realm, losing their careers. You know why? They believed what they had been told. They were told that sex is a purely physical act with no emotional or spiritual ramifications, and therefore, whatever is okay. They listened, they followed those directions, and now their careers are over, because if you listen to what's being said, is it being discussed as purely a physical act, or are people being violated emotionally and spiritually? Matter of fact, Louis C.K., the comedian, is primarily accused of never touching anybody other than himself, but causing emotional and psychological damage to these other people. So the culture right now is screaming that what we have been telling you for years is wrong. Now, they're not going to stop saying it because they're going to just double down somehow and keep telling you that they're right, but their actions, their responses are screaming that they're wrong. Here's a quote I picked up this week from a writer named Christine Imba. She says, "Now could be the time to reintroduce virtues such as prudence, temperance, respect, and even love. We might pursue the theory that sex possibly has a deeper significance than just recreation, and that consent, that thin and gameable boundary, might be the only moral sensibility we need. Respect." Now, I want you to check out, her name is at the bottom. What does it say beside her name? That was not Christianity Today writing. That was the Washington Post, one of their featured columnists who writes on a regular basis for the Washington Post, saying it might just be possible that our whole belief system that sex is purely a physical thing with no emotional and spiritual ramifications or components may be false. And we're over here saying, told ya. I've been getting called a prude for years for saying this. And the church. In First Things, this is a Christian publication, a guy named Carl Trueman said, "The sexual revolution promised freedom. It has brought us moral and social deficit, evident in broken families and damaged bodies." And when I say what I'm going to tell you today, when I tell you what I'm going to tell you, I am not doing it to be a prude. I'm doing it to protect you. Okay? What I'm telling you is for your good. It's not because there's some list somewhere, and if everybody just lists. It's not about a list. It's about the way the universe is configured and was configured by our Creator God. And not living according to His standards and His teaching is a surefire way to hurt yourself in so many ways, especially in the area of sex. Matter of fact, let's see what the Bible actually says about it, because we'll go back to that 2,000-year-old document, which I'm sure has nothing to say about sex in the 21st century. I'm sure there's nothing in there, but if you want to turn in your Bible or turn on your Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, I'm just going to read you something and see if this seems even remotely relevant. Chapter 6, verse 12. You say, "I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. And even though I am allowed to do anything, I must not become a slave to anything. You say food was made for the stomach and the stomach for food. This is true, though someday God will do away with both of them. But you can't say that our bodies were made for sexual immorality. They were made for the Lord. And the Lord cares about our bodies, and God will raise us from the dead by His power, just as He raised our Lord from the dead. Don't you realize your bodies are actually parts of Christ? Should a man take his body, which is a part of Christ, and join it to a prostitute? Never. And don't you realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her? For the scriptures say the two are united into one. But the person who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with Him. Run away from sexual sin." Hear that? Run away from sexual sin. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Did you hear that? You're sinning against yourself. Don't you realize your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price, so you must honor God with your body. Now, here's one of the coolest things about God, in my humble opinion. God never gives us a no without giving us a better yes. Write that down. God never gives us a no without giving us a better yes. One example is in the book of Ephesians. Paul's writing, he's talking about stealing. And he's like, stealing's a bad thing. And what he says, though, is not stop stealing. Well, he does say stop stealing, but he doesn't end it there. He says stop stealing, and then he says go get a job. He literally does. Go get a job. Go to McDonald's. I don't care. Get a job. He doesn't say McDonald's. Stop stealing, get a job, and start giving away money and stuff. Why? Because you'll discover that generosity is better than selfishness. Because the root of stealing is selfishness. I want it for myself. And what you'll discover as you give things away is that God's no stealing produces a greater yes generosity, which Jesus said it's better to give than to receive. So God's no is always mirrored by a better yes. And the better yes for sexual immorality is in the very next chapter. If you just flip over or read the next verse, chapter 7. Now, regarding the questions you ask in your letter, yes, it is good to abstain from sexual relations. But because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. In other words, their world was like ours. Okay? And there's so much sexuality so permeating things that it was really hard to stay single. So he's saying, for most of you, it's probably a good idea. Not all of you. Some of you have, it tells you other places, have a gift of being single, and that's a really good thing. But if you don't have that gift, that control, then you probably should get married. Verse 3, the husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband. The husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so you can give yourself more completely to prayer. Afterwards, you should come together again so Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I won't pretend. There's an image that we use here to help you understand God's concept. It works for marriage. It works for lots of things. And this year, I had Jose draw the castle. So you guys wouldn't laugh at mine. And the basic concept is this. Now, this castle represents marriage. When one man, one woman come together under commitment before God and say, we are going to stay pure within the castle. And by the way, the castle of marriage is also, there's so many other things in life. Like I said, anything you do reflects God's nature. So anytime you violate God's nature, bad things happen. So the question we ask every year is, if this is marriage, this is a man and woman together for the rest of their lives, till death do they part, keeping their intimacy in the castle, that's what this represents. If this is the area outside the castle, what can go wrong if a person takes their sexual intimacy outside of the castle of marriage? Can anything go wrong? Pick up USA Today. Number 1 headline, number 2 headline, number 3 headline. Okay? Everything can go wrong. There's diseases, right? And there's pain. I bet if I went around the room, I bet you, I won't do it. If I went around the room and talked to every person in the room, I would say a significant percentage of you would be able to tell me a story about how you took your sexual intimacy outside the castle and how you still have the scars from it. There are tons of things that can go wrong if you take your sexual intimacy outside the castle of marriage. Now, what can go wrong if you keep your sexual intimacy inside the castle? What can go wrong? What diseases can you catch because you married your original person and stayed with that person for your entire life? What kind of diseases come from that? Kids. You're moving, right? It's like, yeah. That's next spring sermon series, yeah. Children are a blessing from the Lord. Blessed is one who has a quiver full. Okay. I mean, we can laugh and have a good time about it. Also, somebody will occasionally say boredom, which I reply, don't blame God for your lack of creativity. Okay? The reality is, if two people stay committed to each other, to their own sexuality and the sexuality of their partner, and spend their lives in there, there are no bad things that come from that. That's one of my favorite evidences for the existence of God, is how when you follow God's guidelines that reflect His nature in His universe, it makes your life better. No matter what they teach, that's all you got to do. Watch what's being taught outside the church, what they're saying against the church, and then watch the lives collapse from people who disregard what we say. Again, I'm not being a prude. I'm talking for your protection. Because, first point, sex in the castle is safe. It's a safe place for a physical, spiritual, and emotional act that ripples through your entire being. That is the safe place God has given us for that. Matter of fact, it's not just safe for in the castle, it makes you safer outside the castle. Because sex is like an inoculation. You get a shot and you step out in the world, you are less susceptible to temptation afterwards, right? We're allowed to be honest, it's church. Matter of fact, where does most illicit sex happen? Military people, got any ideas when most of the affairs happen? I get to counsel you guys. I know when they happen. I was TDY, I was deployed, I was away from my castle for an extended period of time. I did not get my regular shots, and I caught the disease. Okay? That's just the reality. Sex in marriage, if you want to know how often, I'll tell you later. Sex in the castle is like getting a shot that makes you less susceptible to sex outside the castle. That's a basic truth. I mean, there's no way you can argue that with me. It's just truth. Okay? Matter of fact, verse 5 said, do not deprive each other of sexual relations unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. Afterwards, you should come back together again so Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Here's something from my book. Married couples are commanded to have regular sex, not just in order to reproduce, but because marital sex makes it easier to resist extramarital sex. Now, not only, some of you guys are still blushing, you need to get over that. It's going to get worse. Like now. Sexuality in marriage also is a great building for intimacy. There is an incredible value in being that vulnerable with another person. Allowing yourself, okay, let me just say this. For basically every human being, naked is the most vulnerable you can be. I mean, there's a reason that the models get plastic surgery. Because nobody is happy with themselves, both what our culture teaches and in reality. And when you are that intimate with a person, there is a vulnerability. And when two people are that vulnerable with each other, it can't help but increase the intimacy, the closeness of the couple. And now there's the first really embarrassing question that you're asking. Because I said regular sex within the castle of marriage, and somebody's in your brain, Steve, how often? I mean, you said we need a regular shot. How often do we need the shot? Because my spouse and I don't always agree on frequency of medication. Okay? Right. You ready for the answer? You're not ready for the answer. The answer is once a week. I knew that would surprise you. I get a lot. I am not making that up. There is a professional journal called Social Psychology and Personality Science, which I'm sure most of you subscribe to. They did a study where they took 3 different studies that had been processed over 40 years with 30,000 participants. And the inescapable conclusion of the study was that couples, you ready? Couples who have sex less than once a week have problems that could be caused by the sexuality or could be a result of the problem caused them. That makes you saying? It could be the cause or it could be the evidence, but there is a problem couples have as a general rule who are not intimate with each other once a week. Now, here's the part some people like or don't like. Satisfaction in marriage decreases if it's less than once a week. It does not increase or change at all if it's more than once a week. There's no impact whatsoever. So it's not like once a week is good, twice a week is amazing. It's once a week is almost necessary, which is kind of what it said. Now, that's not the only answer to the question. Some of you guys are going, oh no! Okay? Now, there's another factor that is brought into play here. Because it said each one, verse 3 said, the husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. There's also an arousal cycle that each of us has. It's not always consistent, but there's an arousal cycle where you go from, okay, right after going, and gradually building and building and building. And then there is a point where it's almost not even a good idea, it's almost a necessity. Okay? And every person has a cycle of something like that. And it varies by person. It varies by the environment you find yourself in. It varies by what's going on in your life. But each of us has that cycle. And a spouse's responsibility is to meet, he just flat said it, is to meet the sexual needs of their spouse. Now, I'm not talking if the spouse is currently some sort of a sex addict and, weird, messed up. But for a normal human being, there's the 2 factors. If it's less than once a week, there's quite possibly an issue you need to look into, but you also need to recognize your own arousal cycles. Does that make sense? You weren't expecting either of those answers, were you? You didn't think I'd touch that question, did you? You were wrong. Another issue, and this issue comes up and somebody approached me after church. Yeah, I think it might be getting less of an issue, but I know a lot of people are raised, and were raised, that sex is, it may be stated or unstated, just implied, sex is bad. Sex is a bad thing. Sex by itself is evil, and God kind of allows us to have sex so we can have kids and so we don't go running around cheating on everybody, right? That's not true. Not even remotely true. Because let me give you the word for it. Sex in the castle, this is a big word, although it's only 4 letters long, is pure. Sex in the castle is pure. Now, I need to go back to the Old Testament just a second to explain this one to you. Because in the Old Testament, life revolved around the temple. Your getting to go to the temple was an honor and a privilege and was one of the highlights of your life. There were certain things you could do that disqualified you from going to the temple. Like big bad things, but there were also little things. If you touched a dead body of an unclean animal, you weren't allowed to go to the temple that day. One of the things that precluded you from going to the temple for the day was sex. If you had sex with your spouse, you were forbidden to go to the temple that day because you had been defiled. Okay? Which made it interesting at Passover because, anybody who didn't show up at church that night, know why they're not here. That was free. In the New Testament, after Jesus, though, the teaching changes drastically. Listen to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. Marriage is to be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept undefiled, because God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterers. Undefiled. That is the specific religious term Defiled means you're not allowed to go to the temple. Undefiled means you are free to go to the temple. You are considered pure. And in the way the New Testament phrases sex, in the castle, sexual intimacy is pure. It is good. You could even use the word holy. And for some of you, you need to hear that because you were taught something else. Or, let me say this too. It could be you've had experiences in your past that were outside the castle and maybe outside even your will. Systems of abuse or neglect or something like that, to where you have in your mind and in your emotions a very negative view of sexuality, to where you think of it as bad. And sometimes you just have to retrain your brain and reconvince yourself that in the castle, in a safe, loving, nurturing environment, it's good. Now, how do you keep it pure? This is easy. Imagine there's a sensor right here on the door to the castle, and you have to wave your ID to get into the castle. You know how you keep it pure? Only 2 people's IDs get in. Nobody else's ID works. Every other person who tries to scan, rejected. Okay? Nobody else is allowed in the castle. And most of you are saying, well, that's not really a problem for us. We've never even thought about inviting anybody else into the castle. Oh, you don't invite them, you just bring them along. Jesus put it this way. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I'm going to talk primarily to guys for just a little bit. Some of you ladies, this might apply to you, but guys specifically. You know that arousal cycle I talked about a minute ago? Some of you guys, most guys have a tendency this direction. Spending your day gathering, collecting arousal. Checking out the checkout girl, taking a little glance over here at this one, checking out that one. Spend a little extra time on that specific billboard. Not to mention looking at specifically pornographic images, but you just spend the day building your arousal with somebody who's not your wife. That's bringing somebody else in the castle. 2 things about that. Number 1, this is the cold hard one. If you spend your day being aroused by other women and then come home and say, well, your job is to meet my sexual requirements, but your wife has not been part of the arousal process or even the only part of the arousal process, and you want her to meet your needs, you're just masturbating and using her as your right hand. Ew. Exactly. That is bringing other people in. It is defiling the marriage bed. It is wrong. Okay? Your job, guys, is to limit your vision to that one woman. To let her be the one who arouses you. So that when you are together, the only person you brought into the castle was you. And you were waiting to see her. By the way, I can give you a test where you can tell how good a job you're doing, guys. How attractive is your wife? If your wife does not arouse you, that means in almost every case you are getting aroused by other women. And because your wife is not the source of your arousal, you cease to find her arousing. It's a Pavlovian dog thing, where you've been letting other women excite you, and they are the ones that excite you instead of your spouse. Now, somebody says, some of you are thinking this. You're not going to say it out loud. You wouldn't dare. Yeah, but Steve, we're getting up there. We don't look like we used to look. She doesn't look like we've changed. She might have used to look like a model, but not any. Irrelevant. Completely, totally irrelevant. And there's a big news story to tell you that it's irrelevant. Harvey Weinstein, the guy who started the whole process. Harvey Weinstein that's the one that broke all the news, right? Harvey Weinstein, because he's a rich, powerful, not very attractive, but rich, powerful man, is able and has been able to trade in his wife every few years for a newer model. You look, here's the women he's married. Wow, she's a model. She's a cover girl. She's getting a little bit older. Let's trade her in for a new one. He's been doing this all these years, and during that time frame where he was only allowing highly attractive women to be his spouses, he was also abusing other women because he wasn't getting his arousal from his wife. He was getting it all over the place, which meant she wasn't satisfying him. It's here, guys. It's here. It's the decisions you make. It's the things you look at. You choose whether or not you're going to bring anyone else into the castle. Women, you're not getting off. Because you generally have a different method of bringing somebody else into the castle. You don't spend as much time looking at pictures as you do reading books and articles. The ones that on the cover is the guy with the shirt down to here and the pecs and the hair. And once you get into the book, not only does he look like that, oh my gosh, he's amazing. He is so sensitive and so caring. You never have to ask this guy to help you carry in the groceries. He just does it. Matter of fact, he goes grocery shopping for you and has you sit there. And at the end of the day, he's perfectly happy just cuddling. And the only problem with that guy is he's a girl. He may have an amazing guy's body, but inside that's a woman. And dudes don't come in that flavor. That is not your husband. And if you are letting him frame your arousal, you are bringing Fabio into your castle and not your husband. And you may get mad at your husband because he's checking out the other women, and you have a right, because that is betrayal of you. But he has a right to be mad if the book by your bedside features a guy he can never be. And you will find him less and less attractive because you're comparing him to a fiction that he can never live into. So, you thought you were getting off on that one, didn't you? All right. This is the part, just saying it up front, this is my least favorite part of this sermon, but I have to do it because of all you military people. Because the next question that gets asked is, what about self-gratification? How does that fit in with the castle? And there are, by the way, a lot of people just would say, it's wrong, to which I'm one of those weird people who says, you need to show me that in the Bible, because I'm really a big Bible guy, because God's principles are revealed in Scripture, not in common knowledge. Okay? So you got to show me in the Bible. And when I look in the Bible, I don't see anything much that even addresses the concept, but I see two principles that are directly impacting the area of, I got to say the word, masturbation. And those are, first off, what I just said. Jesus said, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. So anything a guy does or a woman does that involves looking at another person to get arousal, that involves fantasizing about another person, real or imagined, to get arousal, is wrong. Okay? And honestly, fantasizing or images are usually a huge part for most people of self-gratification. Okay, so that comes in. You can't be looking at anybody else. You can't be thinking about anybody else. Second piece was something we read just a second ago, the second principle. And yes, I find this section just as uncomfortable as you do, but I'm standing in front of you talking about it. 1 Corinthians 7:5, we just read it. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations. Now, what's interesting about that verse, that little phrase, is the word deprive. Literally, the word is defraud. Defraud means to take something that isn't yours, to take something from somebody that honestly belongs to them. Let's say you were selling your house, and you're buying a new house. You're buying a house, and you go in, and you look around the house, and you like everything, and one of the things you like best are the cabinets. It's got great cabinets. And you go to the closing, and you sign all the documents, and you close on the house, and in it specifically says, cabinets stay with house. And you go to move in, and the cabinets are missing. Okay? You have been defrauded. There is something that belonged to you that has been taken from you, even though it belongs to you. That is the word there. What it says is, your sexual intimacy belongs to the other person. And if we go back to our arousal cycles, what that means is you're responsible to keep your spouse satisfied. And here's where it comes into play with self-gratification. Self-gratification short-circuits your cycle. Meaning you're not ready to meet the needs of your spouse. Is this making sense? Just not awkwardly, yes. Okay? Now, here's the interesting part when it comes to certain career paths. There are certain career paths, including the military, where you will be separated from your spouse for much, much longer than your arousal cycle. I mean, nobody's got a 1-year arousal cycle. Okay, dead people have faster than that. Now, you have to bring these two principles in and apply them. Okay? Is it wrong? By itself, no. Are you thinking about anybody other than your spouse? Bad. Are you gaining arousal from people who are not your spouse? Bad. Fantasizing? Bad. Looking at pictures? Bad. Can I stop there and let you guys finish the math? You know where you know what I'm saying, right? You've got the picture, and now you're talking. Now where you're going is phones and internet and texting and all that stuff, and the Bible has nothing to say about that. National Security Administration might, but the Bible does not. So that gives you some principles to work with, and I am not going to say anything more. I'm going to let you finish that yourself because you're grown-ups. Okay. Now, last point, because this is important too. Sex in the castle should be fun. Can I just flat out say that? There are the people who think it's something you're supposed to endure. There were generation after generation where wives were taught the only point of view, it was, lay there. Sex in a castle should be fun. Here's what it says in Proverbs chapter 5. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. And you may not think we're talking about sex, but you are. Let's keep reading. A lovely deer, a graceful doe, let her breast fill you at all times with delight, be intoxicated always in her love. And I just noticed the big words in there. Let your fountain be blessed, rejoice, delight, intoxicated. That's the point. Okay? This is so cool. God's really cool. Because when it comes to reproduction, God had a huge set of options he could take. He could have made sex neutral. It could have been like clipping your fingernails on the fun scale. Clip my fingernails. Yep. He could have said it there. He could have said it mildly satisfying. Like maybe a good sneeze. After a sneeze, you just feel better after a sneeze. Not amazingly better, but slightly better. He could have made it slightly painful. There are a lot of bodily functions you have that hurt just a little bit, right? He could have made it dangerous and deadly. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Now it's time for me to bite your head off and eat it. He has animals he did that with. He didn't choose that. For us, he chose to set the fun enjoyment scale to 11. He did that. Not me, not you, not the people who are out there saying all they're saying about sexual revolution stuff. No, God chose that when you keep it in the castle, it is cranked all the way up on the enjoyment scale. When two people are honoring each other and loving each other and are unselfishly working to make sure their partner is satisfied, like the passage we read said you're supposed to do, it's good. Okay? Matter of fact, and it's not just for the guy. In Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, how do you say that one? He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Verse 6, his left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me. You can tell this is somebody who is massively enjoying her time in intimacy with her husband. So it's intended to be fun. Now, one piece comes with that. This is where the culture just flat lies to you. Sex is not a natural gift. It's a skill that is developed over time. And what does every movie tell you? Oh, you just catch that person you lock eyes across the room in the party, and you go hook up for a few seconds, the next thing you know, you're in the limo, and it's getting it on, and that is the best it ever gets. Other than being totally untrue, it makes for good stories. But it's wrong. Sex is a skill. Every human being is slightly different. Every person has different things that arouse them, turn them on, turn them off, hurt, help. Everybody's different. How do you find out what works? What makes your spouse aroused and happy? How do you find out? Practice, practice, practice. Over time, you learn the things that make your spouse feel valued. You learn the things that make your spouse feel happy. You learn the ways that work with each other. Over time, you develop greater trust. So there's more intimacy. So there's more time. Do you see what's happening here? This is a skill that you develop over time. That's why a 54-year-old grandpa can get up and tell you a sermon about sex and that it's fun. Not that it used to be. And I'll stop there before my wife disowns me. Got it? Now, you're going to go back out there, and in spite of all the news stories, they're going to keep telling you that sex is a purely physical activity between consenting adults that has no moral ramifications. It has no ethical ramifications, no spiritual ramifications, no emotional ramifications, as long as both people are consenting adults. And they're going to keep being wrong. And you must, for your sanity, for your safety, for your enjoyment, for your long-term pleasure with the person God has placed you with, you must call the lie a lie. Sex is not about empty relationships. Something much, much deeper. Now, let's flip this just slightly. Because some of you folks here have fallen for the lie about sex. You've believed for years it's empty, it's just physical, da-da-da. Can I tell you another lie that many of you are currently falling for as well, that's actually related? You have fallen for the lie that religion is intended to be simply a physical experience about do's and don'ts. It's about showing up at a building once a week. It's about doing this set of stuff, and it is empty and it is unfulfilling. It's incredibly funny, if hard to get our head around, that when God wants to tell us how a relationship with God is supposed to look, he invariably goes to marriage. In Ephesians, Paul is talking about marriage, and he starts talking about how similar it is to how Jesus views you, how a husband is supposed to look longingly at his wife and just want to do the best for her, and he says that is so much how Jesus views you. And then, to take it into the really uncomfortable zone for almost all of us, Westerners at least, if you go back to the Old Testament, the most explicit book on sex is the book Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, however you want to call it. And it is incredibly explicit about the relationship between these two people. I mean, it's blush-inducing. This is like, tell your kids, don't read that book. But throughout history, everyone has interpreted that book in two parallel ways. One, it is the picture of a couple in love and enjoying each other physically. And it is also a picture of how much God loves us and how much we are supposed to love God. And if you've bought into the lie about sexuality and all that stuff, today I'm telling you, start shifting your brain. Retrain your brain in that area. And if you have fallen into the lie about faith and religion and spirituality that says it's just a bunch of empty rituals, it's just a bunch of rules and regulations, no, it's about a relationship too. And if you'd like to talk to somebody about that relationship today, well, at the end of the service, we've got a table back there with blue bags on it. And if you grab one of those blue bags, we got people who've been trained. They'll take about 10 minutes. They'll walk you through the contents of one of these bags and show you how to have that relationship with God. Not a relationship about rules and rituals and regulations and routines, a bunch of other R words, but about a relationship with God, an intimate, real relationship with God. If you already have a relationship with God, in the same way, the picture is so incredible. In the same way marriage is a ceremony that announces you two are together as a couple, baptism is a ceremony that announces you have decided to be a Christian. You've decided to be a follower of Christ. And we do baptism the first Wednesday of every month. If you'd like to be involved, the first Wednesday's coming up in just a few days. We'd be glad to line you up for that. It could be during the conversation today, you've thought of something you want to pray about, something, or there's something in your heart you want to pray about. We've got a cross over there during the next song. If you'd like to go pray, that's a place for you to just pray safely. If you want to pray with somebody, we've got some people lined up around the auditorium who'd be glad to pray with you about anything that's going on in your life. We've got communion stations, one in the back and one here in the front, to remind yourself of what Christ did for you, how he wants a real relationship with you, not just a bunch of rituals. There's a really good verse in Jeremiah that actually sums up a lot of what we talked about today. Because the culture tells you over and over and over that outside is the good and inside is the boring or the bad, the meaningless, the mundane. And Jeremiah the prophet is talking, and he's talking about the concept in general, not just about marriage. But he says your wickedness has deprived you of these wonderful blessings. Your sin has robbed you of all these good things. You've bought the lie that being outside the castle is where the fun is. And you're missing out on where the fun really is. You're missing out on the real joy. You're missing out on the real happiness. And I hope you understand. I hope you get that as I'm talking to you about these things today, I'm not trying to be a prude. I'm trying to protect you, and I'm trying to lead you away from pain, and I'm pointing to a life with your partner of incredible joy.